So as mentioned, my name is Saugage Ward. Mi'kmaq, my nation, is in the Atlantic provinces of Canada as well as northern Maine. So it extends to a large area. But I live out here in my wife's territory, and that's Shwahema. She's part of the Stalo Nation. So we're not very far away. We live just outside of Hope. We're really close. I think one of the things we really have to start with is understanding where this fight fits in the historical context of the relationship between Indigenous people and colonizers. This is not a fight unto itself. This fight has not happened in a vacuum. This is one fight in a 500-year-old war against colonialism. It just happens to be the newest fight. And maybe perhaps you may have come out, not because the idea of Indigenous struggles or Indigenous justice, maybe you came out because you're concerned about the environment. You're concerned about climate change. Well, I think what makes this fight a little bit different than most Indigenous fights is the fact that we're seeing those two issues come together in a very meaningful way, in a way where non-Indigenous people are being welcomed into the struggle. We are recognizing this fight belongs to all of us. What started as a fight against colonialism 500 years ago is becoming a fight to save the earth now. We are seeing the first battles starting to erupt. We're seeing these kinds of fights start to come to the front. And I think a lot of people are starting to recognize the importance of these kind of struggles. So I just want to speak a little bit about the history of this and how everything kind of came to be, because it's really complex. I know from the videos we see, we could almost look in at it as an outsider and say, okay, I get that. I could understand what's going on there. But no, there's so much more. It's truly complex. So I believe I heard the speaker earlier mention the term settler colonialism. If you're not aware what that term really means, it's a very unique kind of colonialism. In most cases in the world, an imperial nation will go in, invade, set up some kind of power system that they're in charge of. They will take what they want from that country and eventually leave. That is like the standard typical form of colonialism. What we see here in the Americas is something very, very different. Settler colonialism destroys to replace. What that means is you destroy the people. You have to engage in genocide. You have to destroy the power structures, the social institutions. You have to destroy that way of life so you can replace the entire thing with a European version. What was once our homelands are now your Starbucks, your Taco Bells, your malls, your churches, your schools. Those were our lands. And when I say our, I don't mean in the sense that this is over. It still belongs to Indigenous people. But what I mean by right now is it's being contested and it's being dominated by a colonial society who has invaded and taken them over. In the process of invasion, there's a very important component to that. And it's removing the political authority of that legitimate governing system so that you have some kind of yes men in charge. And we see that if we look at international relations. You can look at almost anywhere imperial nations have went into the world and imposed another governing system. Perhaps you can look at today and look at Venezuela. We might be on the cusp of seeing it happen there. What happened with the Indigenous people is we had our own legitimate governing systems stripped from us and taken away. The typical political science word is usurpation. And that means to take away legitimate authority by force and to keep it from you by force. So when we hear this almost complex relationship of hereditary chiefs and band elected chiefs, that's part of the problem. As a matter of fact, that's one of the biggest part of the problems, is band elected chiefs are the imposed governing system that the colonizer has placed over us. Band elected chiefs are responsible to the government. So in Canada, we have something called Indian Affairs. In 1876, they had the Indian Act was imposed. And they had said that basically we're stripping away all Indigenous government and imposing Indian Act elected chief system by way of Indian agents. And these were non-Indigenous people that supervised the overthrow of our governments. So that terminology, usurpation, overthrow, coup d'etat, or regime change, that has been happening in my people's lands for 500 years. And what happens is we get split. We see the elected chief and council who has all the power of a nation state behind them. It has the colonizer's laws, it has the colonizer's police force, and the illegitimate asserted authority to sign away lands, to sign away the future of our people. They don't have the authority from our people. They are in contest to or opposition to the actual traditional mandates of our people. So hereditary chiefs or whatever form of traditional governance that existed before have been 100% displaced in Canada, as well as US. And what we see are propped up regimes answering to government and industry. So when we look at the events in Wet'suwet'en Territory, we see this play out. We see that all of the Wet'suwet'en band elected chiefs signed on with the pipelines, all of them. It's the hereditary chiefs, the true voice, and we talk about concepts of self-determination and the political will of the Wet'suwet'en people. It's through that voice that they said no. And then we see it physically play out. And we see the people make their stands and try to enforce their law and say that they have never, as you've seen, they have never signed a treaty. They have never given up a single inch of that land. But we still see a colonial nation state assert its claim to that land, to make way to destroy our homelands and replace it with industries of incredibly destructive, extractive natural resource type of companies like pipelines. We're seeing that play out right in front of us over and over and over again. If any of you got a little bit of background in this, you'll know just a few years ago in El Segundo, something played out very similar. It was over a fracking fight. And they did the same thing, and that's my territory. And it's the same thing with my people. We have never given up a single inch of our land. But yet here we are, treated as if there is a natural right to govern by Europeans to tell us they can impose their authority on us. They can take our lands, take everything from us, and do whatever they want with it. And then when we finally say we have not just a right, because I don't believe in rights, we hear that term a lot, but really that is Western politics. Rights, and I'll give it to you the way it's spoken about in Canada. Rights flow from the pleasure of the crown. What that means is the sovereign decides what kind of rights you're going to have when they make that society. So for us, a lot of us don't talk about rights. We talk about our traditional responsibilities. We have an inherent sacred responsibility to protect those lands so that the next 7 generations can receive those lands in the same way, if not better, than we received them. And that's what allows us to have this sustainable future, to think about land in a very different way other than a commodity. We think of land as a relative. And I'm sure you heard the word territory, because we don't think of land as just a physical land, we talk about the life within it. My wife's people have a great teachings around something called Sultamok. And that means, or the way they express it, it means that this land is ours, and we have the responsibility to take care of all life in it. And that's how their traditional leaders look at it. And that's like, if we were to call it a prime directive of their governance, is to take care of the land and all life there. That's the relationship they have. It's not seen as, sometimes we use the word steward, right? Stewardship, someone who takes care of the land. But in a way, it's like a self-imposed relationship, isn't it? When we say steward, it's one that seems to be above and managing for. But for an Indigenous, in English, that's probably the closest we come. But in Indigenous languages, it's more than that. It's not like as if I'm somehow in charge of inanimate objects. I'm not just in charge of something exterior to me. I am taking on a responsibility to look out for relatives. In our spiritualistic belief, we have the concept of relationship to the life force, what people call spirit. My wife would call it shwali. It's a life force, and we're all related to it. So when we talk about protecting our homelands, we're talking about protecting our relatives. It is a family as well as a place. It's a little bit harder concept to see it like that, but this is why, from a traditional point of view, you can't sell the land. How many of us can sell our children to make some money? Unless you're a pimp, unless you have that kind of mind frame, that money is so much more important than somebody's life or your own relative. You can't even think like that. How do you sell your grandmother? The idea is, traditionally, we couldn't. That's why governments had to be imposed on us that could. And that is where we see a lot of this conflict over, right? So this is a colonial fight, as well as an environmental fight, as well as a fight for justice. And if I speak to it that way, perhaps I could compel you. I assume a lot of you are here out of a sense of justice. You have a feeling. Perhaps it's a calling in your spirit to want to see justice for other people. And if that's the case, I want you to think about this. The Indigenous experience of colonialism has been the worst set of atrocities and injustices known to human history. If you want to get on board for a fight for justice, this is it. This is the fight that you can start to feel that sense of honor that comes with fighting for justice. So, my wife and I just got back from Wet'suwet'en Territory last Sunday, I believe it was. And we're up there working with the hereditary chiefs, and we're working with Molly and Cody and Smokegum and Frida a little bit, providing advice, providing whatever support we could. And one of the things I kept hearing over and over that I'll share with you just to close off here is Frida kept saying, people need to know this fight is not over. When that gate was opened, the RCMP's narrative was that the fight's done. You agreed to shut down, you agreed to stop this, and the fight's done. And that's not the case. As a matter of fact, right up to now, RCMP has been violating that agreement over and over on a daily basis. The people there are still ready to fight. The people there are almost in like a strategic pause to wait on what the hereditary chiefs want to do and decide on their next actions. So one of the messages I suspect that Frida or Smogum or Molly would say to you will be something like, this fight is still on. They still need support. They still need help. They need people there on the ground ready to handle whatever kind of action they're going to take. And they need it as a sustained fight. So we've seen some solidarity actions. They're very emotional, right? They're emotionally driven because it's a response to those gates being taken down. To make this strategically effective, that needs to be sustained. Otherwise, it's just something that passed by the news cycle and it's gone the following week. It's just actions that need to be sustained that will allow them to put the pressure they need to be able to help leverage whatever powers and advantages they can against the state and industry. So I want to thank you for a few moments of your time. Our religions.